Om Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. ब्रह्मग्रन्थिजमारुतानुगतिना चित्तेन हृत्पङ्कजे सूरीणामनुरञ्जकश्रुतिपदं सोऽयं स्वयं राजते यस्मात् ग्रामविभागवर्णरचनालङ्कारजातिक्रमः वन्दे नादतनुं तमुद्धुर Jagadgeetam Mude Shankaram. Dear friends, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you to this 22nd presentation under the series 2020 series on Bharatiya Samskriti Parampara. Today's subject is Bharatiya Sangeeta, and our distinguished speaker is Dr. Padma Sugavanam. Her credentials are so extraordinary and her work is so voluminous that I thought it best to publish to you her profile so that you can take the time to go through what an outstanding work she has done in such a young age, and also managing a family and a large number of students. Extraordinary work, Dr. Padma. We are very happy. We are very proud that you are actually with us here living in Columbus, and that's a blessing for our city of Columbus, which is a very important city. Actually, a few years back, when the Venkateshwara installation was going on in our temple, she created a play by which uh, Narada goes to Mahavishnu and reports to Mahavishnu about a Sangama Kshetra in the Western Hemisphere, where Veda, Sangeeta, Natya, and every branch of Indian culture is vibrant in one city. And Narada brings Mahavishnu to Columbus, and then eventually gets established in the Bharatiya temple as Venkateshwara. So you can, this is a wonderful city to be, and we are very happy that you have chosen to live in Columbus. A very brief introduction, because the subject is vast, the time is short. Dr. Sugavanam is a A-grade artist in All India Radio, and then she has received many awards. The list is too numerous to quote, but two of them very important decorations are the Yuva Kalyana Jyoti she got from the Kanchi Paramacharya's trust. And this another one is the Chambai Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar Memorial Award from the Sri Krishna Gana Sabha of Chennai. Two of the very important awards that she has received among very many. It is not that the other awards are any less important. And her PhD was in music, was from the University of Madras, and her thesis is Kohala in the Sanskrit textual tradition. I was very happy to see the title of her PhD because I also saw her other papers. Beside Kohala, she has also written on other important Sanskrit authors, Jagadeka Malla and Abhinavagupta. So for some of you who might not have heard of Kohala, Jagadeka Malla and Abhinavagupta, we look forward to Padma's presentation when she traces the history of music. Suffice it to say that they are all the Purvacharyas that has been recognized by Sharangadeva in his magnum opus text, Sangeeta Ratnakara. Sharangadeva actually traces the Sangeeta Acharya Parampara from Lord Sadashiva himself, like we do all the Shastras. Sadashivaha, Shiva here means Parvati, Brahma, Bharataha, Kashyapo Munihi, Matango Yashtiko Durga Shaktihi Shardula Kohalau. So you can see Kohala, her subject of PhD, is very, very ancient in the tradition of writings on music. Um, and actually, Sharanadeva goes on to add the King Jagade Kamalla also as the Sanskrit author. And then we look forward to listen to you more about these authors, if not today, in due course, Dr. Padma. And then another very, very dear and highly, highly respected author for me. I never fail to call this author with the title Abhinava Gupta Pada. So we only after Shankara Bhagavat Pada, I personally use this extension to Abhinava Gupta Pada because of his extraordinary eminence, and he is a very, very important interpreter of Bharata. So as you can see from Dr. Sugavanam's articles, she has studied all these Purvacharyas. And friends, I am very sure that you will absolutely thoroughly enjoy this intellectual treat from Dr. Padma Sugavanam. And I'm sure that as we move on, you will be having an enormous amount of questions. So in the interest of organization, I request all of you to please post your questions in the chat box. And Sudhir has kindly agreed to look at all those questions, and then he will actually point out and raise those questions for response from Dr. Padma. So, Dr. Padma Suvanam, I now request you to please start your presentation, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Ashwath ji, for such a wonderful introduction. I'm not really sure that I deserve all those encomiums you've really paid to me, but I very much appreciate the affection and the warmth with which it comes. Hello, everybody. Namaste. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me here to be with you. I'm really delighted to be among fellow Jignasus. It's always a learning journey. Whatever you do, whatever stage of life we are in, we are always here to learn. And being along with fellow Jignasus is always a delight. And I am very, very happy to be here. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Indian philosophy and musical composition. I thought that since all of you are students of philosophy or practicing philosophers, I thought that this could possibly something of interest to you. And what we will be doing is we will take a kind of a sojourn through different landmarks of Indian philosophical evolution and try to assess the influence that it has had on musical composition. Due to the shortness of time, I will only be able to give you a bird's eye view, a kind of an aerial view of the links between these two Shastras. And let me just start off by saying that what you will hear is not an exhaustive perspective, but only selected philosophical landmarks that have had a direct impact on music and musical composition in particular. Now, let me try and define what area I am going to be covering when I say musical composition. As you know, Gita Matanga defines Gita as Swara Tala Padatmaka, which means it has Swara, notes and melody, Tala, rhythm, and Pada, lyrics. So these three are essential elements that go to make what a musical composition is. But today in our lecture, I'm going to try and focus our attention on the Sahitya part and how philosophical thought processes have influenced the way sahityas have evolved over time, or how different composers have expressed their philosophical leanings through their musical compositions. So another thing, since we are trying to understand a music from a reasonably large period of time, say, from 2000 years ago, we don't really have many notations or samples of songs. We have lakshanas of compositions, but very few exemplars of compositions. So you will have to forgive me if I will have to make do with whatever few examples that are available for me to share, particularly from the music of the ancient period. So before we get started off with the lecture per se, I would like to sing a small invocation composition for you. नादतनुमनिशं शङ्करं नादतनुमनिशं शङ्करं नादतनुमनिशं शङ्करं नमामि मे मनसा शिरसा नादतनुमनिशं शङ्करं नमामि मे मनसा शिरसा नादतनुमनिशम् मोदकर निगमोत्तमसाम वेदसारं वारं वारं मोदकर निगमोत्तमसाम वेदसारं वारं वारं नादतनुमनिशम् शङ्करं नमामि मे मनसा शिरसा नादतनुमनिशम् सद्यो जातादिपञ्चवक्त्रज सरिगमपदनी वरसप्तस्वर विद्यालोलं विदलितकालं विमलहृदयत्यागराजपालं नादतनुमनिशम् शङ्करं नमामि मे मनसा शिरसा नादतनुमनिशम्. In this composition, Tyagaraja calls Shiva the Samaveda Sara, the essence of the Samaveda. I'm trying to share my screen. Are you able to see it? Yes. Is that
Yes.
yes?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. All right. So we believe that Indian music has its roots in the Samaveda. Samaveda recitation or chanting is a very, very old but structured, structured musical form. See, Vedic practitioners had a very primary concern, that was to preserve the integrity of the text as well as the swaras. So the music is structured in very great detail. It's not something that is simple and can be transmitted easily. It takes years of training and understanding, and even Vedic music has its own meta language, to communicate musical thoughts and musical ideas to the students who are learning Samaveda. So that is how intricate, that is how structured the music of the Samaveda was. The music of all the Vedas, unlike the text which we believe to be Apaurusheya, which was just heard and experienced by the rishis, we can see in many texts, particularly of Shiksha, we can see that the music has had a slow evolution. So the Samavedic chanting didn't probably happen all at the same time, or didn't just evolve like, or what shall I say, wasn't in its present form at the point of its inception. So it did have a gradual and slow evolution. Like, let me try and explain that. Initially, Vedic chanting was done with dual tones. Then the Triswara chanting with the Udatta, Anudatta, and Swarita Swaras. I'm sure all of you are familiar with these things, since you're all also learning Veda and chant. You all chant the Vedas. Udatta, Anudatta, and Swarita. But slowly, after this stage of Triswara, they kept adding one note after another. So there was incremental, what shall I say, increase in the number of notes that they were using in the Samic chanting. So at one point, it landed up to be a total of 7 notes. And unlike what we are familiar with, or what many of us are accustomed to hearing, the notes aren't the Shadja, Rishabha, Gandhara, which we call Sari, Gama, Padhani. They are called Krushta, Prathama, Dvitiya, Tritiya, Chaturtha, Mandra, and Atiswarya. So these were the names for the Saman notes. And different Shiksha texts also call these notes in very different ways. So there is a bit of up and down over there, but to a large extent, this is an accepted version of the 7 notes of the Saman scale. But the names of swaras like Saregama Padha most likely came a little after the time of the Vedas, and they don't seem to have been concurrently existent. But Shiksha works do refer to Sarigama Padhani because they do compare the Vaidika Swaras to the Laukika Swaras, because that gives the ability for the student to relate to things because they already are familiar with this. But we should understand that the Shiksha text came many centuries after the Vedas themselves. Therefore, that gap is what they are trying to bridge at this point. The scale of the Saman chanting translates roughly to the Karahara Priya scale, what we call Karahara Priya scale in Carnatic music, and what is called Kafi Thaat in the Hindustani style. Now, I just want to play a very small part of a clipping of Saman chanting, and I would like you to observe the little intonations and the little trills that happen. It's not that the notes are sung in a very straightforward and plain way. It is very subtle, and if you are able to experience the trills and the little minute intonations, that really tells us a lot about the state of technical sophistication that the Saman music had. In fact, there's a story that Kanchi Mahaperiyava, he apparently once had a vision that there was one particular shakha of Samaveda in some remote village in Kerala. So he organized a group of his scholars to go there and bring those scholars to the Kanchi Matha and have them teach other students and so on. I've had the opportunity of listening to a little bit of that, some part of recording of that, and that version of Samaveda is nothing like what you hear over here. So the sound of it is completely different. So what you will hear is the Kautuma Shaka, and I will allow you to make your own judgment when you listen to it. Please give me a moment for this to start. Sorry.
Be unstoppable with an MBA from
YouTube has its troubles these days. Are you all able to hear?
Yes.
was a little sample or a little taste of some Saman chanting. Now, the earliest evidence we have of musical composition or musical performance of a composition was in the recitation of a kavya. You all know Adi Kavi Maharshi Valmiki's Ramayana is believed to have been taught to his disciples Lava and Kusha, who later sang this in front of Rama. So the painting that you see is the Lava and Kusha with the veena and one with the cymbals. They are presenting this in front of the sages and Rama. That's the representation in that picture. So even though we know that Lava and Kusha sang the Kavya, the entire Ramayana, so Ramayana is a story and it is in the form of poetic verse. So they had set the poetic verse to music and had presented it. They actually wandered around towns spreading the good, beautiful story of Rama. And later Rama himself invites them over to the palace and listens to them. But the problem with Ramayana is it's a massive epic, and we don't necessarily have what shall I say? We don't have any details regarding segregation as a specified music composition. So the Ramayana was composed as a kavya. It was set to tune and sung, but it wasn't necessarily made as a music or an art musical composition. So before we go any further, let me just try and define to you what I mean by art music. So and somebody who isn't using their mic, if you could just mute yourself, that will be very, very nice. Thank you so much. So I was saying that there isn't any sectional segregation or structural format in the Ramayana that suggests that it was created as an art music composition. So, and by art music, I was telling you what we mean is that music which is sung for the music's own sake, and that which is sung in a certain setting wherein the prominence of the whole experience is focused on the music. So
Mr. Adi from Mumbai, I think his microphone is on. Can you please mute?
Yeah.
Can all the listeners please mute yourself?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, because I'm wearing headphones, like the sound turns out to be a bit more loud in the ear. Right. So the earliest codified grammar of different aspects of performing arts we see in the Nati Shastra of Bharata Muni. So Nati Shastra is dated about 2nd BC, and think of it as a handbook on the grammar and technicalities of dramaturgy. I'd like to just prima facie emphasize here that today what we understand by the word natya is dance. But in Bharata's time, natya referred to drama. So whatever dramas used to happen, they were called natya. Within it encompassed the dramatic elements. It also included dance. It also included music. So it was a kind of a composite art form with music, dance, and dramatic elements. So all of them come together, and they come together to create a certain aesthetic experience for the audience who is watching. Now, we have a tradition, or what shall I say, a literary convention or a cultural convention to associate everything that we value greatly with the Vedas. Our culture has paid absolutely the greatest regard and holds the Vedas at the highest pedestal ever. And therefore, it seems just logical that you would connect whatever you value a lot, whatever the culture values a lot, with the Vedas. And in this, music and dance and drama are not far behind. The shloka that you see on the screen is from the Natya Shastras, chapter 1. Sudhir Garu, if you are the admin of the group, is it possible for you to mute them, please? That would be helpful. Sorry. The shloka that you see on the screen is one from the Natya Shastra. It says, Jagraha Pathyam Rigvedat Samabhyo Geetamevacha Yajurvedad Abhinayan Rasan Atharvanadapi. So, very simply, what he's trying to say is that from the Rigveda, the lyrics, the dialogues were all taken from the Rig Veda. From the Samaveda, the music was taken. From Yajurveda, dance and gestural representations were taken. And Rasa, which is the aesthetic experience, was taken from the essence of all of that, was taken from the Atharva Veda. So the Vedas held such a venerated space. We can see that very clearly over here, that in the Indian psyche, a connection to the Vedas means we accorded value to something. There isn't much textual evidence to support such a theory in all righteousness, but I feel that it is more a metaphorical or figurative, symbolistic conception, if you will. Now, then Bharata's Natya Shastra also asks this question, what is the purpose of drama? What is the purpose of the performing arts? Why should we do it? So, why should we ask these questions, you may think, and what does that have to do with the philosophy of performance art? But no, it's actually very directly important, because why we do something is the first link to the philosophy of the art. So here is what Bharata has to say, and I'm going to read a quote for you. This Natya teaches duty to those bent on doing their duty. It teaches love to those who are eager for its fulfillment. It chastises those who are ill-bred. It promotes self-restraint in those who are disciplined. It gives courage to cowards, energy to heroic persons, enlightens men of poor intellect, and gives wisdom to the learned. It gives diversion to and firmness to the mind to persons afflicted with something is missing here, I'm sorry, and also hints of acquiring money to those who are all for earning it, and it brings composure to persons with an agitated mind. Notice here that Bharata doesn't necessarily accord any Paramarthika angle to the performing arts. The purpose of Natya, which he is describing here, is one very much of this world, is very much of the Laukika Prapancha and things that we relate to in our day-to-day existence, in our day-to-day lives. Now, from the Natya Shastra, we come to know that there were, at least according to the text, at that time, there were two distinct genres of performance. One was called Marga and the other one is Deshi. See, we oftentimes, think that, in ancient times, there was one kind of music, and now we have like all these different things. We have film music, we have pop music, we have, devotional music, we have folk music, we have so many different genres. But in olden times, there was just like one old music. But that is not true. In fact, we feel that way, what shall I say? Because we can only work with whatever little literary and textual evidences we have. And if we have not had a chance to actually study them, those misconceptions kind of just remain. So let's go back one step and try to understand how the existence of genres actually works in the art scenario. Genres are generally defined mostly by the context and the objective of the performance. So in Natya Shastra, he talks about two kinds of performance of Marga itself. One he calls Gandharva and one he calls Gana. This I'm moving slowly towards the musical side of it. Okay, so Gandharva, if you look at it, will include only songs with devotional lyrics, and it is part of a ritual performance of music during what is called a Purvaranga. So for any of you who have had a chance to see either Kathakali performances or Kudiyattam performances, you might have noticed that they have like a musical performance or a ritual performance even behind behind the screen, like before the screens are open, they have it backstage. And something of that sort was what the Purvaranga was. And in this Purvaranga there was pure music, like which wasn't dependent on the drama or the situations or the characters in the play. Therefore that music, that Gandharva music, was supposed to be a kind of a very pure form of music of that time. And the other one, called Ghana, had a much larger scope of themes which will suit the requirements of the play. Now, just to make a present day analogy, we have our Carnatic music on one side, and then we have film music on the other side, which is situation centric and which is theme centric. But Carnatic music is now, at least now, this is our form of art music or music for its own sake. And also we have other forms like bhajans and devotional singing, semi-classical music, and all these are defined by the purpose. Now, if you have a gathering of people intent on singing the names of the Lord and just doing Sankirtana, that is a devotional performance. Though you may be using many of the elements from other genres, the purpose of the music, the purpose of the artistic presentation determines what genre or what category it falls into. So in Gandharva, the devotional angle of the songs was already established. Now we can see like the beginning of the devotional musical form right from the times of Natya Shastra. Like we have evidence, literary evidence of compositions that were designed with devotional lyrics, devotional lyrics. Now, one of the very important developments in the Indian subcontinent was the Bhakti movement. The Bhakti movement started off in the 5th century with the advent of the Alvars, who ranged between, I think, the 5th and the 9th centuries, and later the Nayanmars, who were Shaiva mystics, who were ranged between the time periods of the 6th and the 8th centuries. So the Alvars and the Nayanmars, both these groups were from the Tamil region, and their bhakti ideology, was steeped in principles of love of the divine, Sharanagati or Prapati, and Bhagavata Seva, condemnation of all kinds of discrimination, etc. And these principles and ideas picked up so much momentum in the southern tips of India. Then it started spreading slowly upwards and gained a lot of traction up to the Karnataka, up to the Dakkan region. It gained a lot of momentum. And by around the 12th century, the ideology had pretty much swept across the entire Indian subcontinent. What is important about understanding the Bhakti movement is that it brought forth a very technically evolved music style of singing. I want to particularly make a mention of those singing traditions or those musical traditions that evolved with the Shaiva musicians or Shaiva bards who were attached to the Shiva temples in Tamil Nadu. So amongst the Nayanars, the 3 major mystics, Shaiva mystics, were Appar or Tirunavukar, Samandar and Sundarar. And their songs together are called the Devarams. These are sung in very specific ways for specific rituals in a particular temple. And people who undertake singing this, they are given specialized training for this, and also you have to have the arhata to do that, which means you have to be from a certain family lineage who have had traditions of doing this seva for the temple in question. So a similar kind of system was also with the Arayars in Vaishnava temples and Oduvars in the Shaiva temples. Now, even the modes and the melodies were technically codified for these Devaram compositions, and they had their own rhythms. The melodies were called pan. So what we call today as ragam was at that time called a pan, and they were not exactly the same as ragas, but let's just for simplicity's sake understand them as being some melodies and tunes. So now we see that a musical system that many people claim that the tradition of music of the Oduvars has continued generation after generation, and it's still alive today. Yes, I think that would be true, but it would have undergone several changes. I don't think it is representative of what happened in the 5th century, but nevertheless, the tradition is very much alive. And this bhakti poetry, which sprung forth with such great fervor and great poetic beauty, these are still considered classics of Tamil literature till today. And because Bhakti movement, the literature that came out in Bhakti movement, the songs that came out in Bhakti movement, because they used regional languages, it made the songs more intimate and more personal to the society of that time and even later. So in a sense, the sahityas were so relatable and so personally touching for the common folk of those times and times that came later, that Bhakti movement to a great extent defined how musical composition, even in later times, would conceive of different ideas or how they would present their emotions. Much of it is drawn from these compositions. Now, I would like to share one Devaram with you. I don't know if many of you have had a chance to hear many Devarams. This one is a composition of Tirunavukarasar, who is also called Appar, and here it goes. மாதர் பிறை கண்டியானை மலையான் மகளொடும் பாடி, மாதர் பிறை கண்டியானை மலையான் மகளொடும் பாடி, மாதர் பிறை கண்டியானை மலையான் மகளொடும் பாடி, போதோடு நீர் சுமந்தேத்தி, போதோடு நீர் சுமந்தேத்தி, போதோடு நீர் சுமந்தேத்தி, புகுவார் அவர் பின் புகுவேன், யாதும் சுவடுபடாமல் ஐயாறு அடைகின்ற போது, யாதும் சுவடுபடாமல் ஐயாறு அடைகின்ற போது, காதல் மடப்பிடியோடும், காதல் மடப்பிடியோடும், காதல் மடப்பிடியோடும், களிறு வருவன கண்டேன், கண்டேன் அவர் திருப்பாதம், கண்டறியாதன கண்டேன், கண்டேன் அவர் திருப்பாதம், கண்டறியாதன கண்டேன், கண்டறியாதன கண்டேன். This was Madar Pirakanyane in a composition of Appar, who was a saint that lived in the 7th century. Around the same period as the Bhakti movement was born, a massive colossus would change the way the Indian culture perceived God, devotion, philosophy, salvation, and spirituality. In the 6th century, Shankara Bhagavad Pada revolutionized the philosophical and spiritual scenario in India. But it should be understood that the Bhakti movement, which had already made headway in southern India, made the spiritual and religious ethos very ripe for Bhagavad Pada's almost revolutionary, at that time, revolutionary approaches and interventions into the state of India's religious and spiritual milieu. And after all that Advaitic philosophizing, which all of you I know are very familiar with, he still preached Bhaja Govindam, Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukrin Karane. So at the grassroots, bhakti is what will hold the spiritual values of society. And this too, in a way, was the bhakti movement's great contribution to India as a whole, Indian culture as a whole. From the southern tip of India in Kerala, where Shankara was born, let's jump to the northern tip, to Kashmir. So by the 10th century, the state of arts and aesthetic thought had come a really long way from Bharata's description. And to this, the contribution of Kashmiri philosophers and rhetoricians absolutely cannot be overstated at all. See, we must understand that performing traditions are dynamic. It's like a live creature, you know, and Lakshya, which is the practice of it, always takes the lead in adopting new approaches, in adopting change and new ideas of beauty, new ideas about refinement, and Lakshana follows, sometimes very late. The period between about 9th to 11th century, the Kashmiri output of Shastra in the area of literature, in the area of arts, in the area of philosophy, changed the way we understood aesthetic experience. To date, very little of our understanding of these subjects has changed from those times and what they had prescribed. The most prominent of Kashmiri thinkers, and like Ashwath ji mentioned earlier, one of the persons that he would like to call, give the suffix of Pada after Adi Shankara Bhagavad Pada was Abhinavaguptacharya. Abhinavagupta was a polymath. He was a poet, a philosopher, an aesthete, a logician, a theologist, a tantric, a musician, a dramatist, and a practicing mystic who produced volumes and volumes of original works and also critical works on many of these technical subjects. Abhinavagupta followed a school of Kashmiri Shaivism called Pratyabhijna. So Pratyabhijna was a system that was founded by a philosopher called Utpaladeva. He lived around early 6th, 7th century period, and he propagated this system of philosophy called Pratyabhijna, which was very closely related with tantric practices, and was later became such an important part of Kashmir's perception and practice of religion that it started being called Kashmiri Shaivism. So Abhinavagupta belonged to this tradition, and he expounds all his aesthetics based on these principles of his faith, the Pratyabhijna or Kashmiri Shaivism faith, and he freely imbibes all those theories into his aesthetic philosophy. And also there was another person's contribution who I would like to mention. Utpaladeva, the grand guru of Abhinavagupta himself, greatly adopted many of the principles put forth by a grammarian philosopher called Bhartrhari in a text Vakyapadiyam. anybody who has had a chance or not had a chance to read this text, and anybody interested in philosophy, I would very much recommend going. It's a delight to read, and the kind of sophistication of thinking is astounding. Anyway, but that may have to wait for a later time. But Utpala Deva and the Kashmiri Shaivists adopt many of the ideas from Bhartrhari, and Abhinavagupta is able to translate that into the understanding of aesthetics. Now, let's see what Abhinavagupta is trying to say in his theory of aesthetics. So he calls aesthetic delight rasa. According to him, rasa is akin, not the same as, but akin to spiritual experience, as one is able to transcend the limitations of the self. So you are able to lose the perception of you being yourself and able to see reflections of yourself in another person that you are watching from a distance. And this process is called sadharanikarana, or universalization, where you feel universalized with all the other creatures or the living beings in the world. And during that time, when this generalization or sadharanikarana takes place, the aesthetic contemplation of the characters and the other artists that you see on the stage happens, and then aesthetic delight is born. So according to him, rasa lies in the consciousness and is also experienced in the consciousness, and it's in a way also itself a state of consciousness. So rasanubhuti, clearly he says, emerges from the sattva guna within a person. So what happens is, when the process of universalization happens, the rajas and tamas are removed, and therefore it allows the sattva guna to burst forth, and that is what allows ananda to be manifested. So they also called rasa as Brahmananda Sahodara, not Brahmananda, Brahmananda Sahodara. It is something that gives you a delight almost the same as Brahmananda, but of course it is only present as long as you are experiencing that aesthetic activity. Now, let us try to take a look at the songs and the lyrical content of composition in the period with the background of what we have understood about aesthetics. So we'll have to go to a little bit of a technicality here. The early compositions, I did say in the introductory part that in the early, we don't have too many exemplars of early compositions, but of what we have, there are a few different types. On the technical front, there are some compositions which have what is called shushka aksharas, or meaningless syllables, that those themselves become the sahitya for the composition. Like there's Jhantum, Jagati, Avalitaka, and things, the Sahitya goes like that. Abhinavagupta says that the Gitaka varieties should have devotional lyrics, and he gives the example of a composition whose Sahitya goes like this: Devam Rudram Pranamami Sada. That's what you see on the screen. Now, if you just look at this, you look at this line that's on the screen, you can mistake it for any Carnatic composition today, isn't it? So we do see that there is some link even in terms of these aspects of what kind of thoughts are expressed, and the method that they are expressed, and the style in which they are expressed. And even these, we see that there is a certain link that links us to some of our older traditions in music. A slightly later contemporary of Abhinavagupta, Shangadeva, who wrote the Sangita Ratnakara, also by the way from Kashmir, whose family later settled in the Deccan, says that Gitakas, the composition style called Gitaka, should only be in praise of Shiva. So that he makes the specifications on the Sahitya's theme that much more specific. So The Gitaka songs are songs that have these multiple sections called dhruvas and multiple what shall I say, facets called angas, which are pada, biruda, tenaka, pata, pada, and tala. So in this set, what that I said, pada refers to Sahitya, and therefore while expressing the specifications for pada, he says, Sharngadeva says that they have to all be in praise of Shiva. So the earliest version of musical composition as we know it today uh, could be credited to Jayadeva, the author of the most wonderful poem in Sanskrit, the Gita Govinda Kavya. Jayadeva was a poet who lived in the 12th century, and he belonged to the kingdom of King Lakshmanasena of Puri, who was himself a very staunch Vaishnavite. So you can see glimpses of that Vaishnava faith. So the Eastern India had its own flavor and had its own way of devotion in the Vaishnava sect, and many of these tenets and principles you can see in the way Jayadeva treats Krishna and Radha and the Sakhi, and how the situations develop in the Gita Govinda. So for anybody who may not be familiar with it, so Gita Govindam is a lyrical poem, a kavya, and it's the story of the divine love of Krishna and Radha, and who go through an emotional journey of love on one night. So Jayadeva's compositions are part of a story narrative. It's like a full story that is going on, and the themes of songs are about the situations that the story is describing. But nevertheless, the compositions are so beautiful that the sound of the Sanskrit itself is musical, and they shine as standalone pieces just as well as they shine as part of the entire story narrative. So the Kavya is a mixture of song and verse. Each of these songs that Jayadeva created had 8 stanzas, and therefore it was called Ashtapadi. And what he contributed in a lasting way in terms of the structure of music composition was the refrain stanza, refrain stanza, refrain stanza kind of structure. So what we today call a pallavi, in his compositions were called dhruva, but after the dhruva, a stanza would be sung, and then you would go back to the dhruva, and this kind of stanza to refrain structure is something that we follow even till date. I wanted to sing an Ashtapadi for you, but I have so much more to say and I possibly don't have time. So I'm going to just skip that. Next, I would like to share a little bit about Annamacharya, Pada Kavita Pitamaha, and a poet beyond compare. So he is a poet that lived in Tirumala in the 14th century. He was a converted Sri Vaishnava and a very, very staunch one on that, and followed the principles of Vishishtadvaita as propounded by Sri Ramanujacharya. So he had Diksha from Adivan Shatakopajiyar of Ahobilam, and he learnt the tenets, learnt the texts, the scriptures of the Sri Vaishnava tradition, and mastered them all, and much of the philosophy of the Sri Vaishnavas is reflected in his compositions. So what is this philosophy? So Ramanujacharya propounded this school of philosophy called Vishishtadvaita, and Vishishtadvaita means Vishishta Advaita. It means qualified monoism. And what I mean, to just put things in perspective, right? Because we are all more familiar with Vedanta, I think, with the Advaitic ideology of Vedanta. I'll just try to explain this in those terms. So unlike the Vedantins, the Advaita Vedantins, Vishishtadvaita believes that Brahman has attributes. So Brahman is nirguna only in the sense of it not having any blemishes. So it's like Ananta Kalyana Guna, or the Brahman has Ananta Kalyana Gunas, but only till that sense, right? It stops over there. It Advaitins will say it is nirguna. Parabrahman is nirguna. It doesn't have any attributes, but Vishishtadvaitins believe that it does. The Jivatma has the latent potency to experience the same kind of ananda as the Paramatma, but it is not the same as Paramatma. So they don't equate them, but they say that the Atma has the potency to reach there, and moksha is only attainable through Sharanagati. So principles like Sharanagati or Prapatti and Acharya Bhakti, that is another very important principle in the Sri Vaishnava faith. All these are very clearly and very, very often described in many compositions of Annamacharya, particularly in his Adhyatma Sankirtana. Now, there's a very beautiful composition of Annamacharya. It's a Uyyala song, so a swing song where Annamacharya describes Venkateshwara and his consorts swinging on a swing. So he says that he compares the swinging and he says that, you know, you're swinging so beautifully that now you're able to relate to the vacillating minds of your human subjects. And he says the rhythm with which you're swinging represents the rhythm of the universe, represents life and death, represents creation and dissolution. And in his own very beautifully lyrical style, he establishes in that song that the entire cosmos is created by Mahavishnu's Sankalpa. So these are some of the things that Vaishnavites, Sri Vaishnavites believe in, and those are reflected in a poetic, in a very beautiful style, lyrical style in the creations of Annamacharya. So Annamacharya was also a huge inspiration for many composers who came after him, notably composers of Shringara-based padas. And there's a story of Purandaradasa meeting with Annamacharya at Annamacharya's very advanced age, and they had a meeting at Tirumala, and Purandaradasa took his blessings and took some upadesha from him, had this philosophical discussions. There's a beautiful story about that, and we see that these two great people had like, you know, their paths had crossed and they had an exchange of ideas as well, which brings me to what I'm going to talk to you about next. Now, sorry, one second. So the Karnataka region around the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries saw a resurgence of the Bhakti movement with a great gusto. And this was thanks to the Haridasas. Haridasas were followers of Madhvacharya, the 13th century saint and the founder of the Dvaita school of philosophy. According to Dvaita school, Brahman and Atman, these are two unchanging and independent entities, right? They are not equated to be one. This is different, that is different. And moksha is attainable only if only if Paramatma or Brahman is able to give his grace upon you. Only by the grace of God you are able to attain moksha. So there are some of the followers of this group, the Haridasas. They were wandering bards whose primary purpose in life was to sing the praise of God and spread the message of bhakti wherever they could. And to all the people that they could reach, they wanted to spread the message of bhakti. They wanted to spread the message of what shall I say, simple living and high thinking. They wanted to reform society. They had so many wonderful ideas that they wanted to share just to elevate the lives of the common public. And they did so in very simple Kannada, something that the local anybody of any level of education and erudition could easily understand and relate to. And the most prominent of the singing Haridasas was Purandaradasa, the 16th century bard, and he has himself said in one of his compositions that he has composed 4,75,000 songs in his life. You know, I just did the math of it, and it works to about 16 songs a day in his life period. If he had to compose so many songs, he would have had, from the day he was born, he would have had to compose 16 compositions a day. I can't even imagine how somebody can have that kind of creative output. So aside of his wonderful songs, he also created the pedagogical system for Carnatic music, and Devar Namas brim with the essence of bhakti and how to lead a noble and a simple devout life. I want to just share with you one composition. Ashwath ji, you should tell me when I need to stop, because I may go another 10 more minutes if that is all right.
I think it is okay. What we'll do is the questions we will take offline.
Okay.
So they can actually send the questions in chat, or they can send a text to me, and then I'll pass
Sure.
it. Actually, even if they post it into the Vedanta Friends WhatsApp group, you
Sure.
will also get it.
Sure, that will
So
be great.
we'll postpone the question hour. So please continue.
Thank you. So in this composition, I chose this particularly because there a very beautiful line in the Charana which goes, Hariya Smarane Matradinda Ghora Durita Vellanasha Parama Padava Koduva Namma Guru Purandara Vithalana. So Guru Purandara Vithala. So what he says, that this Paramapada or Paragati you can only get by the grace of Purandara Vithala, or God. So I wanted to share this because it's a beautiful song, and even the another Charanam, he says, Pante Pagade Adi Ninu Vyarthakala Kaliya Beda Antakana Dutarige Lesha Karuna Villavaya. When Yama's Dutas come to take you away, they don't even have this much Karuna or this much compassion on you. They'll not listen to anything that you say. So don't waste your mind doing useless things. Instead, worship Hari. I'll very quickly sing the song for you. ಮರೆಯಬೇಡ ಮನವೇ ನೀನು ಹರಿಯ ಚರಣವ, ಮರೆಯಬೇಡ ಮನವೇ ನೀನು ಹರಿಯ ಚರಣವ. ಪಂತ ಪಗಡೆಯಾಡಿ ಪಂತ ಪಗಡೆಯಾಡಿ ನೀರು ವ್ಯರ್ಥ ಕಾಲ ಕಳಿಯಬೇಡ, ಅಂತಕನ ದೂತರಿಗೆ ಲೇಷ ಕರುಣವಿಲ್ಲವಯ್ಯ, ಮರೆಯಬೇಡ ಮನವೇ ನೀನು ಹರಿಯ ಚರಣವ. ಹರಿಯ ಸ್ಮರಣೆ ಮಾತ್ರದಿಂದ ಘೋರ ದುರಿತವೆಲ್ಲ ನಾಶ, ಹರಿಯ ಸ್ಮರಣೆ ಮಾತ್ರದಿಂದ ಘೋರ ದುರಿತವೆಲ್ಲ ನಾಶ, ಪರಮ ಪದವ ಕೊಡುವ ನಮ್ಮ ಗುರು ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲನ, ಮರೆಯಬೇಡ ಮನವೇ ನೀನು ಹರಿಯ ಚರಣವ. So we have taken a look at Shaiva principles, Vishishtadvaita, Dvaita, and their impact on the Sahitya of musical compositions. There is one more sect which has had a very profound influence, particularly in the last few centuries, and those are from the Smartha sect. So what the Smarthas believe is that all gods are equal. They are symbolistic representations of different ideal qualities and different ways to perceive the same Brahman. So they use the idea of Saguna Brahman as a stepping stone to advance towards Nirguna Brahman. And in this tradition have come many of the composers in the last 300 years who have really shaped the way Carnatic music sounds today. Most importantly, the Sangeeta Trimurtis, Tyagaraja, Muthuswami Dikshitar, and Shyama Shastri. Amongst these, I wanted to make a particular point about Muthuswami Dikshitar, who practiced a philosophical niche, that is the Sri Vidya Upasana. Sri Vidya Upasana is a very refined ritualistic practice of worship of Lalita Parameshwari with many tantric and mantric elements too. Muthuswami Dikshitar has composed a series of 11 compositions called the Kamalamba Navavaranas, where the compositions really act as a musical handbook on the details of each of the Avaranas. You see the Sri Chakra there. The Kamalamba Navavaranas describe each of these Avaranas in great detail, and all the ritualistic concepts, the technical, the Sri Vidya oriented technical terminologies, all of them are available in the compositions themselves. And that is a beautiful and very intense example of how a school of philosophy has had direct and such a deep impact on the lyrical content of classical music compositions. So this is what I wanted to share with you. Fine, these are the few of the things that I wanted to share with you. But just in conclusion, after a look at so many different schools of philosophy, and mind you, all the major darshanas, major schools of philosophy have had a big impact in the arts of their times, and we have seen some of them in this talk. I would like to finally, after all this, I would like to leave you with one thought in the form of a beautiful composition. So we started off with a Kriti of Tyagaraja, and we will conclude also with a Kriti of Tyagaraja. Dvaitamu sukhama, advaitamu sukhama, dvaitamu sukhama, advaitamu sukhama, advaitamu sukhama. Chaitanyamavinu sarva sakshi, Chaitanyamavinu sarva sakshi, vistaramuga delpumu nato, dvaitamu sukha ma, advaitamu sukha ma, dvaitamu sukha ma. Gagana pavana tapana bhuvana dyavaniro Nagada Raja Shivendradi Surulalo Bhagavad Bhaktavara Sarulalo Bhagaramil Tyagaraja Chita Dvaitamu Sukhama, Dvaitamu Sukhama, Dvaitamu Sukhama Advaitamu Sukhama. Thank you for so patiently listening to me. If I have made any mistakes, please forgive them. They come out of a place of sincere ignorance. I'm glad to hear any questions if you have time or any suggestions that you have. But thank you very much for being here and sharing this time with me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Padma Sugavanam. We are so delighted to have you here. And just to probably, since you might not have heard some of our earlier presentations, we have had Krishna Mantrapragada, Professor Krishna Mantrapragada, speaking on Annamacharya, his life and composition. So he is going to come back to us, and then he has done a very creative work of how Annamacharya, not only in his life and philosophy, but also how he has influenced film music. So Dr. Mantrapragada will come back, and then he will continue his presentations on Annamaya. Then you mentioned about Muthuswami Dikshitar. We are having another presentation on Muthuswami Dikshitar's Navagraha compositions vis-a-vis Jyotisha. Our dear friend Mrs. Mishra, Pooja Mishra, she already gave 2 talks on Jyotisha, and the next we are planning on the concept of Navagraha in Jyotisha, and we will juxtapose that with Muthuswami Dikshitar's compositions.
Wonderful.
So I welcome you to all those sessions. And
thank you.
Moving forward, you really piqued my interest again when you picked up one of my most favorite authors, Bhartrihari, and his outstanding work, Vakyapadiya, and the Spota theory. So I look forward to having you back here to talk about Bhartrihari and the Spota theory in the context of music, because you bring so much of scholarship of juxtaposing the itihasa of Sangeeta, the Sangeeta Bhumika itself in contrast to the various darshanas. And then I saw that one of your papers is also on Shiksha Shastra, which again is very, very close to my heart, because I insist on the Shiksha in all my Veda chanting classes as to the accuracy of how it should be presented and spoken. So we look forward to your 2 presentations now that you have covered a long span of history. One is on Bhartrihari's Vakyapadiya, which is probably not many in our audience know. And then the next one is on Gita Govinda and the lyrical beauty and the lyrical ballad style in classical Indian music. So kindly plan those 2, and then please come back to us.
Sure. Thank you so much for being so welcoming.
Yes, actually, please do continue to come, and please keep planning. And now that you know, and this audience is a very, very enlightened audience, an extraordinarily scholarly audience. So you have real Rasikas, Saradayas, and Panditas in our assembly. So I'm sure there'll be mutual thrill and enjoyment in these conversations. So I do apologize that since it's a working day and tomorrow is a working day, so there will be a lot of questions coming up. Please do post all those questions, and then definitely Padma will come back to us in many ways and then address those questions. So the next presentation, we are